All right. Hi there, and welcome to lesson MS202, lesson number 14 on Army Doctrine and Symbology. My name is Captain Silver Beatty. I'm an APMS at the University of Montana, and I'm going to be leading you through this lesson today. So to start off with, we're going to really get our brains right in the mindset of talking about symbols. So while this lesson is called Army Doctrine, we're really focusing on that second part, the symbology part of this. We're going to go over symbols. We're going to talk about how it plays into Army maps and overlays, but we really need to get our brains thinking about symbols and what they mean to us. So to start off with, why do we use symbols to represent things in our lives in general? Well, symbology serves as what we call a shorthand. It's a shorthand method of depicting common things in our lives. And while we're talking about military right now and Army doctrine and symbology, we're going to discuss a whole bunch of stuff that talks about symbols, and it's actually something that you probably notice in your everyday life on a regular basis. Now, in what ways do symbols make our lives easier? And then on the other hand, how can they even make our lives more difficult? Well, they do depict common items in our society. It's all based on common understanding and knowledge. But if you don't know the symbol, it can be hard to depict. Take, for instance, you have a driver's license here in America. State to state, sometimes those symbols will differ, but for the most part, if you can drive in Montana, you can drive in Arizona, you can drive in West Virginia, you'll understand the common symbols. However, if you were to go to a completely different country, say anywhere in Europe, some of their symbols and driving signs, their traffic signs, aren't what we're used to over here. And so if you don't know what those symbols actually depict, it can be hard to understand what the message is, right? Now, we've talked about, thinking about the symbols that we see on a regular basis. Take a minute. What do you see commonly that maybe there's no words, it's just a symbol? And think about how often you see that and what it means. Can you think of a few of those? And the next thing is, how do our symbols make our communication easier? And then the last thing I want you to think about here, do all symbols have the same meaning in other countries? Well, no, we already know that different traffic signs mean something in different countries, but are there some out there that are internationally recognized? Now let's go back to some of those symbols you were thinking about that you see on a regular basis. Did any of these maybe pop into your brain? If I were to give you a pop quiz right now, could you tell me what all 8 of these symbols mean? I would think so. In fact, I think even my kindergartner would be able to tell what the majority of these mean. Right? So we have stop right there. We know that an 8-sided red sign with those letters STOP means to stop, right? That's a stop sign. Then we go to the next one, that one with the exclamation point. That usually means danger, right? It's some sort of caution or danger sign. The next one to the right there, the third one, silent zone or no music, or maybe it means turn your phones off. The far one on the right there, that's typically what we use to show that there's a restroom. Bottom left, we know that's a handicap sign. We see different variations of this, but for the most part, we know that symbol means either it's an accessibility area or it's a handicap zone, different meanings for it, but we know that it relates to the handicap. And that second one on the bottom, do not enter, maybe a no-go zone. We see this in construction. We see this on traffic. That red circle with the white line in the middle, don't come in here. That third one there on the bottom, typically the recycle. Again, there's all kinds of different variations of this, but when we see 3 arrows in a triangle in some fashion like this, we know that probably means to recycle, reuse, something along those lines. And then, of course, the bottom one on the right there, no smoking. That's a simple no smoking sign. All right, so diving right in, our learning objectives today, we're going to explain some common military symbols now that we've talked about some civilian and societal symbols. And then we're going to categorize those symbols. I do want to warn you, this is a long class with a lot of information. I encourage you to pause here if you haven't already. Take out a paper and some notes. Maybe have a Google Doc off to the side to take some notes, type something out. But I do think it's important for you to take some notes on this because there is a ton of information. And I'm going to also give you some opportunities to pause the video and take pictures of the slide because you'll need that potentially later towards the end. All right, so let's do just a little bit more thinking here. Now let's move into thinking from a military standpoint. Why is it critical to mission success that the Army has a common set of doctrinal symbols? Well, the Army answer is it facilitates common understanding in a clear and concise manner while eliminating ambiguity. So that ambiguity part of there, it's eliminating any kind of confusion or maybe gray areas. The symbology that we use in the military, there's no maybe answers. Yes, this could be an answer. It's either right or wrong. So it completely eliminates ambiguity. There is a black and white answer. There is a black and white description of these different depictions that you'll see. And that is right there why it's critical to mission success. Now, how do symbols facilitate that clear and concise message while eliminating the ambiguity? Well, they have very specific meanings regarding size, type, friend or foe, etc. And it's done in a common language that all soldiers can comprehend. If you learn the basics of what symbols represent or the base parts of a symbol, you can read a full symbol because it'll have different things added to it that you'll also understand. Now, why do we use symbology? We have two things to talk about here. One, there's symbology, and then there are symbols. So symbology is the common set of doctrinal military symbols. It's a very plain, concise, and understandable language. Now, symbols themselves, they communicate a lot of information. They eliminate lengthy explanations. They allow for greater speed and less risk of misunderstanding. And again, they eliminate ambiguity. Now, there are advantages and disadvantages. Focusing on the advantages, it's a common terminology. It can communicate a lot of information, and again, it eliminates those lengthy explanations. However, a disadvantage, one, everyone has to learn the symbols, and on top of that, everyone has to be able to comprehend that information. Think about it in this way. A picture is worth 1,000 words. In Army language, one picture can be worth an entire operation. You can look at one graphic and understand bits and pieces of an operation and put it all together. So what is an actual military symbol? Well, the scientific term, a logogram, signs or characters, that represent words or phrases used to depict graphic representations of a few different things. In military symbols, it can represent units, equipment, installation, activities, control measures, and then some tactical mission tasks that are relevant to military operations. When we see them is when they're being used in sketches or on maps and overlays as a way to show the operation. And each symbol is composed of typically a frame, status, color modifiers, and other amplifiers that create the whole pictorial dialogue. Now, we do have two different categories of military symbols. We have framed and unframed. Now, a framed military symbol, which you'll see a picture of and a depiction of in just a moment, includes the unit, equipment, installation, or activity. So a framed one covers those four different things. An unframed symbol is going to be based on control measures or tactical symbols. Those are considered unframed, and you'll see exactly what I mean in just a moment. So when we talk about the frame, that's that border of the symbol. It serves as the base, and other components are then added to that base. It indicates the identity, domain, and status of that particular thing that we're talking about. Now, talking about status, we have three different statuses, if you will. Either the object exists or is present. We know the object will exist, so it's planned or even anticipated. Or the object is thought to exist. Then we call that being suspected. If you look to the right there, when we use the frame, you'll see on the top there is a solid line. A solid line frame indicates that that particular thing that we're talking about is present. If it has dashes around it, it's either planned or anticipated or suspected, depending on what we're talking about. So there's your first clue there. If it's a solid line, it is present. If it's a dashed line, it's either planned or suspected to be there. Now we go into identity colors. Think back to if you've had a class on map colors. These are kind of similar. We have 6 base colors: blue, yellow, green, red, and then black and white. Those 4 colors on the top are pretty important there because the blue is going to signify whether it's a friendly or an assumed friend. Yellow, we don't know. It's unknown, or we're still pending identification on it. Green is neutral, and red, of course, is going to be hostile or suspect. So if you were to have a symbol in blue, it's framed as blue, or it's filled in blue, we know that it's friendly or assumed to be a friend. If it is red, framed red, or filled in as red, we know it's hostile, enemy of some sort. Now the black and white on the bottom, depending on what type of overlay you're working with, we use those 2 colors just to show boundaries, lines, areas. We obviously put our text in black, icons, and then the frames themselves would be black. Now here is a time that I would say it's probably a good idea to take a picture of this. These are some of your echelon and unit symbols. So the echelon amplifiers is what we call those. Those are the things on the top. So if you were to have a boxed frame and then have 1 dot on top, that frame, anything that's inside of that box, is attributed to the squad if there's 1 dot on top. If there's, say, an X on the top of that box, we know it's a brigade. Now, if you look on the bottom there, that's what's going to be inside of the box. So you might have a box with an X. That means that particular symbol is talking about an infantry element. Maybe you see down there towards the bottom right, that thing that looks like a wrench. That's going to be an element that's a maintenance element. Now let's say you see a box with that lightning bolt in the middle and 2 dots on top. That would be considered a signal section. You see how all this is coming together? So the top part, the echelon amplifiers, tell you what the size of the element that you're talking about. And the bottom part there, those icons, are going to be inside the box to tell you what type of element it is. So once again, let's think about a box with a dot in the middle and 2 lines on top. We're thinking about a battalion artillery, right? So artillery battalion or a squadron. A box with a dot in the middle and 2 lines on top is going to be your artillery battalion. Hopefully this is all starting to come together for you, and hopefully you took a picture of this. Now, why is it critical to ensure that every slight detail is correct in the symbols that you're drawing out or depicting? Well, pretty obvious. If the details aren't consistent or correct, that message that you're trying to get across might not be received correctly. And then, of course, the actions or understanding might be skewed, which could lead to a mission failure. There's a big difference between 1 dot on top and 1 line on top. That is the difference between a squad and a company. And that's a lot of manpower different. Now, how do the colors influence our unit symbols? Well, they identify friendly or friend, assumed friend, hostile, suspect, neutral, or even unknown or pending, which is all vital information for your mission planning. Think back to your TLPs. Using METTC, you need to understand what kind of enemy you're facing, and these symbols can help with that. All right, so now we're going to talk about equipment and tactical mission task symbols. Now, if we're looking at these, weapon size is indicated by the horizontal lines, and I'm going to show you those in just a moment. If it has no lines, it's just a basic system. One line means it's a light, maybe low altitude, or even a short range system. Two lines, of course, moving down, medium, medium altitude, or medium range. And if it's got three lines, that's your big stuff. That's heavy, high altitude, or a long range weapon system. There's some examples there on the bottom for you of the different weapon systems. You have rifles to the left, mortars in the middle, and anti-tank missile launchers there on the right. And as you can see, going left to right on each of those, one line is going to be your smaller system, all the way over to three lines. Those are your bigger, your heavier, high altitude or long range systems. So the more horizontal lines, the bigger the weapon. Now let's talk control measures. What is a control measure? Well, it's basically a way of regulating our force or our warfighting functions. Now there are 6 warfighting functions. Those are going to be mission command, movement and maneuver, fires, protection, sustainment, and intelligence. Now that's a class for a different day, but just know that control measures consist of these things, and then I'm going to talk to you about how to depict those in a symbolic form. Now, control measures themselves, they help provide control without any detailed explanations. They help commanders direct their actions. They foster coordination and cooperation between your forces. And these particular symbols fall into 3 categories. They're points, lines, or areas. Here are a few examples of some control measures. So I'm sure you've probably heard of attack by fire or support by fire. So those 2 on the left, that's how that's shown on an overlay. You can also see there in the middle what an ambush would look like, what an observation post might look like. And there on the right is what your target reference point or TRP would look like on a map. Now these are those symbols used to depict those control measures. They can also be used for boundaries, as you can see there, fire support coordination measures, maybe some airspace measures and air defense areas, and even minefields. Boundaries are the most important because they actually define your AO, right, your area of operations. The biggest thing to remember about these is that if you don't use the correct symbol, it can lead to fratricide, right, green on green, or even some other mistakes. So it's very important that you understand what these different symbols actually depict and how to correctly put them on an overlay. So here's another one I want you to take a picture of. This is why I'm saying there is a lot of information, but this is the vast majority of what you need to be able to understand and reference when you're looking at different types of symbols. So you've got there on your left, you've got friendly and allied units. In the middle there, you have your enemy, which it says in parentheses red. These would normally be depicted in red. On your far right, you've got different types of obstacles or the obstacle effects. Down there on the bottom left, you have your different echelons and how they're marked. And then very bottom right, you've got your tactical mission tasks and maybe some other symbols that you could see. So take a picture of this. You'll probably need it by the end of this class. If not, you'll need it at some point in your career, especially during your ROTC career. So this is always good to have on hand. If you want a copy of this, talk to your ROTC advisor, see if they can get you into Blackboard if you don't already have access. And these are available in the Army Doctrine and Symbology class. All right, so let's quickly talk overlays and strip maps. Now this is actually out of the practical exercise course, but since I can't quite do a practical exercise on video, I'm just going to give you the answers here ahead of time. But overlays and strip maps, as we've been talking about what you're going to put these symbols on, they show a lot of things, right? We've seen maps, but this is the next step up of putting an overlay over the top where you can mark different things on the map because we don't draw directly on maps, right? These typically show maybe routes of march, start, release, and checkpoints, critical points like bridges, your light lines, traffic control posts, movement corridors, or even some other things that might be assembly areas or phase lines. That's all that you would put, or that's a few of the things. Sometimes there's more, but these are the things that you would want to put on your overlay. Now, if you don't know what an overlay really means, the way that I think about it is you have a map, you take a plastic film or a plastic something of some sort, and you put it over the top. You lay it over your map, and then you can use map pens, dry erase pens, whatever you would typically use in your program, and draw over the top of that map without actually destroying or messing anything up on the actual physical map itself. Now, when we talk about the different things that you'll find on an overlay, I'll go through these quickly. These are pretty self-explanatory, right? So you have your start point, your SP. That's the location on the route where the marching elements are going to fall under the control of a specific commander. A release point is the opposite. That's a location on the route where those same elements are then released from centralized control. You have checkpoints that are going to be designated along your route just to keep you in line with your timeline. And then you have critical points. Like I mentioned, something to think about would be bridges. These are points that identify where interference with your movement might happen. Now you have light lines. These are a designated phase line, forward of which all vehicles will be required to use blackout lights during limited visibility. This is a little bit more advanced than what we expect you to understand in this class, but just something for you to know ahead of time. Traffic control posts are going to be positioned along the route to prevent any kind of congestion and confusion. Think of like a traffic cop that's waving vehicles along, keeping the traffic moving. That's what we call a TCP, or traffic control post. They can be manned typically by military police or your own organic unit personnel. And during those, reports are made during both arrival and the full passage of a unit utilizing that TCP. And then you have movement corridors. And these are designated areas that are established to set conditions to protect and enable movement of traffic along a designated surface route. Again, a little bit more advanced than we really need you to understand for this class. Now the next thing, we kind of just talked about it, but why would we depict these symbols on the overlay instead of just drawing them on a map? Other than the rule of we just don't draw directly on maps. It's also what we call OPSEC, or operational security. Graphics should be absolutely removable and destroyable. We never write or draw directly on a map. Now, let's do a quick practical exercise. We're almost done. Hopefully you took a picture of that slide a couple of the slides that I told you to take pictures of. So we're going to pull up about 10 symbols. And I want to give you some time to pause this once they pop up and write out or type out what you think those symbols actually identify. I heavily encourage you, don't just skip past this part. This is a really good learning tool. This is a really great way to practice understanding what these symbols are. So take the 5 or 10 minutes that it might take to look at the symbol, pull up your sheet, or pull it up on your phone, or pull it up on a Google Doc, and actually figure out how to put together the math or the puzzle to figure out what all of these actually depict. Okay, are you ready? There you go. 1 through 10, go ahead and pause it right here. And then when you're ready for the answers, come on back. All right, so hopefully you actually paused it, took the time to go through these. You probably noticed that some are a little bit easier than others, right? So let's go through and see if we got the right things. So number 1, that's pretty basic, right? That's your signal sign. That's your signal symbol, if you will, that lightning bolt. Number 2, did you guess that it was an enemy medical squad? Now, how do we know that it's an enemy medical squad? Well, we know it's enemy, 1, because it's red, and 2, because it's in the shape of a diamond rather than a box. We know it's medical because it has a cross in the middle, and that's the typical sign for medical personnel. And that single dot on top depicts that it's a squad size element. Number 3, did you get that it was a friendly airborne engineer platoon? How do we know? We know it's friendly because it's blue, We know it's airborne and engineer because of the airborne wings and the sideways E for engineer. And we know it's a platoon because it's got the 3 dots. Number 4, enemy artillery section. Again, it's red and it's in a diamond shape for enemy. It's got the big red circle in the middle, which means it's artillery, and it's got 2 dots on top, which makes it a section size element. Number 5, that's your friendly infantry squad. It's blue for friendly, and it's in that box. It's got the X in it to show the cross rifles. See how they kind of all start coming together? That shows it's infantry, and the 1 dot on top makes it a squad size element. Number 6, that's your amplifier for armor. Number 7, remember the weapon system. This is going to be your semi-automatic rifle, right? So it's a medium-sized rifle system. Number 8, it's going to be your enemy infantry brigade. Again, it's red for enemy with the diamond symbol. It's got the X in the middle to show that it's infantry, and it's got the X on top to show that it's a brigade size element. Number 9, that's going to be a friendly transportation company. It's blue and in a rectangle for friendly. It's got the wagon wheel to depict transportation, and it's got the 1 line on top, which depicts that it's a company. And lastly, number 10, that is an enemy anti-personnel mine. That is just the signal or the symbol, excuse me, for an anti-personnel mine. But since it's red, we then know it's an enemy one. So how'd you do? Once we explain through these, does it make a little bit more sense? If you're still struggling with these, that's okay. Just keep practicing, keep looking at more of these types of symbols. Maybe have some MS3s or MS4s draw some up for you and see if they can quiz you on those. And they'll start to become a little bit more natural. So with that, that is it. Let's review our learning objectives. So we explained common military symbols, and then we went through and learned how to categorize those. And we even finished out with a little pop quiz to get your brains moving and see if you can start applying all of those different pieces and parts, start putting those puzzles together. Pretty soon, you're going to be a pro at reading overlays. Great job. And as always, if you have any questions on anything that you just learned in this class, please reach out to your own ROTC instructor first. Maybe reach out to an MS4 or a high-speed MS3, see if you can get your questions answered. And if you still can't, feel free to reach out to me at silver.beatty@mso.umt.edu, and I'll do my best. Thank you.